to like keep myself on pace, I'll look at it just to know what to get through. So yeah, I'm really, really, really grateful for this opportunity to speak and for what this community is, to kind of like give this little show and tell opportunity about our little vacation. So just as a background, Claire used to work, volunteered a summer at this refugee resettlement center.
Shelter for undocumented
Shelter for undocumented immigrants. And I'll kind of like say a little bit about why my mind went to refugee resettlement center in a little bit. But at the time where she was there, there was just basically like grown men who would come from Mexico and they wanted to just like work. So like Claire would always tell me these stories about men who would wake up early in the morning, they would go to the iron, like they would iron their clothes really well because they needed to go out and like find work so that they can find work and then they can send money back to wherever their families. Primarily I would say Mexico, right? Right. So I think we went in there not expecting that, but something like at least a little bit similar. What we saw was an entirely different population. And I think we've heard a lot about this, but it's no longer like men crossing the border for work. Obviously what we've been seeing and what the biggest source of controversy about this has been is that these are children. So they're fathers and children, they're unaccompanied minors, they're mothers and children, and they are fleeing violence. So it's like the immigration system, which you know, we've always had a little bit of a broken immigration system. Previously, men crossing the border for work, but now women, children, and their fathers making really, really perilous journeys for safety. And so I'll talk a little bit about like what that has meant. So I'm so glad that we just started with what Jesus said about strangers. Because in our country, as we know, there are other things that are said about strangers. So like the most famous one being Trump, when he says, when Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending them you. And I want to just like highlight, when he says you, he means people who work, people who are parents, people, they're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems. They're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, and then I'm not going to say the rest of it because, ironically, what the president says cannot be spoken in church in front of people, in front of young children. And that is kind of like I came in with that level of anger, but also not knowing exactly what it was that I was going to see. And that is, so I'm going to talk a little bit about like the things that we saw and then how it changed me and how my perspective changed. So the very first day that we got there, we went with it to this, what is now I would consider like a refugee resettlement organization, kind of Annunciation House. And we were part of the Border Immersion Experience. The very first day we went to this fence. And on this side of the fence is El Paso. Literally 2 feet this way, there are children who are in Ciudad Juarez. Which Ciudad Juarez, if you look, is one of the most dangerous cities in the world. It has an incredibly high murder rate, just like really deteriorating social service system, really high population. El Paso, on this other side of the fence, is one of the safest cities in the country. It has a really high Latino population, but incredibly, incredibly safe place. And to see basically on this other side of the fence, what I could see is like my daughter, right? Like there were like 6 kids right on this other side of the fence, basically my daughter's age, no different. The only real thing that they have committed was that they were born on that side of the fence. And because they were born on that side of the fence, they had to face a life that was very different. Poverty, facing immense threats to their security, and it just seemed incredibly arbitrary. Like, why is it that I can go home and I know that my daughter can go to a playground where she can feel safe, she can come home, and she has, groceries to eat, and on this other side of the fence, literally kids that were my daughter's age were coming, and I couldn't, I could touch them. I could put my hand through the fence, and I could touch them, I could give them a high five, but they could not cross over on this side. So I think, thinking about what that means for us as Christians, where we see ourselves as part of a broader community and humanity. So I want to just talk about some of the things that we probably in this congregation know as myths, but that have been out there, and thinking about how to counter them. And they will relate, I think, directly to our experiences. So the biggest implication, the scare tactic in what the president said was really around crime, and that illegal immigrants, when they come in, bring in crime with them. And the reality is that there is some crime that comes, no doubt, but actually illegal immigrants are less likely to commit crime than U.S. citizens. And there's a few different reasons for that. One is that if they commit a crime, they're going to get deported. So they have a very strong incentive to be completely law-abiding individuals. It's not that they're going to get a slap on the wrist. Even their traffic violations or things can land you in a place where you're going to get deported. So that's one reason. The second reason is, as I mentioned, these people are not coming for work, or the current immigration crisis. They're coming to flee for safety. So they're often coming from a place because if they were criminals, they would be basically the criminal justice system in Honduras or in Guatemala. People pay bribes for safety to gang members. When people are fleeing violence, they're coming to this country because they don't feel safe in their own countries. So actually, when you look at the statistics, the crime is significantly lower for these immigrants that are crossing the border because of those reasons. We get a chance, so there are, what we learned was that there are felons who are here illegally. But they're not felons for the reasons that you would, when you conjure up the word felony, what you immediately imagine. Because when you cross the border the first time, past that fence, the very first time it's a misdemeanor. If you get deported back to the side of the border, and then you try to cross again, the second time you cross is a felony. So a lot of those people who you see in felony statistics are actually, haven't committed any sort of violent crime, they've just literally crossed the border a second time. And that crossing can be considered a felony. And often we have, in our current criminal justice system, in our jails, in our prisons, we have lots of people who are parents, who are just here to literally get enough money for their kids to provide their kids safety, and we are paying thousands of dollars each year in our criminal justice system because they are considered felons. So the second myth was that undocumented immigrants take American jobs, which is in some cases true, low-wage labor, there's our immigrants and undocumented immigrants take a lot of those jobs. And, but, it doesn't show, obviously, that, in the communities that they also start businesses, they hire other people, they provide demand for other businesses. But the most important thing, I think, that came to me is it feels so distant living in Morgantown around that sort of problem. But then I go to, I love Aldi. Aldi is one of my happy places each week. I go to Aldi. I love going to the Aldi produce section because I love, a good deal. I love good deals. And I've been just much more aware of this invisible economy. When I pick up a bag of onions, and I was just looking at the price of them, $2 for a pound of onions, or 2 pounds. I don't even know what they are. I think they're a pound an onion. Somebody has to pick those Somebody has to package those onions. Somebody has to put them in a crate, and somebody, even after Aldi makes its money and the major company has to make its money, a little bit of money has to go to the people that grow it. Like, there is no way that the math works on my onions that I put in my in the recipes that I use if it's not picked by migrant labor. There's no way that so like a lot of the things that we buy each day that are in our homes, they are funded. They are directly picked and brought to us by people who are working in really crazy abject conditions. We got a chance to go to this, is it the United Farm Workers?
No, it's just a shelter for migrant farm workers.
Yeah. There's a shelter for migrant farm workers. We go in there, and there's literally just like mats on the ground, like 30 mats, where it's just like people are lying down on them. And I think it's I'm gonna get the specifics of this wrong, but basically like close to like 3 a.m. they'll get on a truck, they'll be transported to a farm, and they will work like 13, 14 hours. And then they'll be put back on the truck, they'll come back, they'll sleep for a little bit, and then they'll go back and work again. And know that like we are every time you have a recipe with any of our produce pretty much, any chicken, any basically meat or I would say like a lot of the things that are in our houses are, when we get those things cheap, it's coming at a certain price. These people are making our lives the way we have our lives like possible. And to note that we are part, like whether Morgantown, West Virginia has a really high immigrant population or not, which it doesn't, but there are immigrants here. Our lives every day are enabled by the solidarity with our brothers and sisters who are putting in immense amounts of labor to make our lives possible. So I mentioned, like, I think the third myth for me was that idea of workers, like male workers that were coming here, but now seeing these children and mothers. We actually ended up staying at a house that housed pregnant women. And to think about, like, I mean, just for those of you who are parents, to remember that time where either your spouse or you were pregnant. And, like, what an uncomfortable experience it is both ways. And to think about people making that journey while they're pregnant, often walking this really incredibly long way, or trying to find a certain path to the U.S. I know that if we take Ella to Pittsburgh to visit her grandparents, we have to put in our car like 10 different sorts of snacks and blankets and books and things, just to keep her like settled for like the 2-hour car ride to Pittsburgh. And to think about the sacrifices that individuals made was just really incredibly just humbling. We met fathers who were from a father who was from a part of, was he? Chiapas, Mexico, where they didn't even speak Spanish. So they spoke a native language. And he just himself walked and tried to get ways to the country, to the U.S., just with his son. They couldn't speak, he spoke Spanish, his son couldn't speak, he couldn't even speak Spanish. And to make that trek all the way to this area. And are there any people who are like Hamilton fans? Anybody? There's my wife. There's a line in the Hamilton play that says it's just, the Hamilton play that like says that it's who lives, who dies, who tells your story. And it just kept, as I saw every single one of these parents, that line kept jumping in my head. Because there is a tug of war in our country. There are people who are defining these individuals as criminals, who are talking about them like they are vermin. And really, when you look at what these people are doing, it's utterly heroic. We had the opportunity, which was one of the most moving experiences that I've ever experienced, where we got to go to a funeral that was like held literally at the place that we were staying. And it was this mother who had brought this 2-year-old all the way from, I don't know, from where?
Guatemala.
From Guatemala. The 2-year-old had a certain sickness that couldn't get treatment from where they were. So like this mother brought like in her arms, and there were pictures, bringing this 2-year-old to the border. She got all the way to the border, and the child passed away. Today to think about, like, as on Father's Day, I reflect a lot about my own experiences as a parent. I couldn't imagine being in a position where my daughter was facing this incredible health crisis, and I couldn't get her the services that she needs. I would like to think that I would be strong enough and that I would be resilient enough to make the sacrifice that this woman made. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I'd be logistically prepared enough to do it. And to literally carry this child all the way through this journey across the border. What people are doing on that border, we can hear a lot about statistics about the numbers of people that are crossed, but it's heroic. It is heroic. And I think, I'm a first-generation immigrant. My mom made incredible sacrifices. I'm sure that for all of us as a nation of immigrants, we can relate some great-grandparents or great-grandparents who made these incredible sacrifices themselves. And I know that for my own mother, my mother brought myself and my older brother to the U.S. It is a really vulnerable experience to do that, to do something like that. It is a vulnerable experience to come to a country where your native language is not the main language, where your native culture is not the main culture, where you abdicate your entire support system of your broader family. And there are thousands of people that are doing that every day. They are crossing the border, and we got a chance to go to this resettlement house where there were like hundreds of cots every day. There's just like hundreds of, and they are all full. They are like all full. There's no problems, there's no like fighting or anything like that. These people have made these incredible journeys with their kids. I remember seeing a father who was clearly like, we were there around nap time, like just basically comforting his daughter lying on a cot while she was napping. Much as I did with her. But the sacrifices these people make, these heroic, superhuman often sacrifices. And so as Christians, as human beings, to have that responsibility to really, like, when there is a narrative, to call these people, to dehumanize them to our narratives. I see a responsibility to just stand up and kind of like clear that these people are not coming here to like fundamentally change our way of life. They're coming here because they want our way of life. They're not coming here to cause, they're coming here to be citizens in our community. And there's a picture here actually, like, regardless of all these fences and walls and things that we make, we were actually like at a fence where we had like Border Patrol agents that were giving us a presentation of what they do. And what was interesting about that presentation, which I'll just like touch on briefly, was that what they were saying is that they didn't need a wall. They needed more technology and things, that they needed more Border Patrol agents. But literally as we walked past right after their presentations, we noticed that there was a few cuts in a fence literally right behind them. There was like a square fence, the cuts in a fence, which I stupidly like kicked in. So it was like just a square hole in the fence. And we heard stories that even in the best wall, which is like that wall that we saw on the first day of our trip, people were breaking their hips. They were climbing the ladders. Nobody is coming to this wall, like, it's not a vacation trip. If they get to the wall, they're going to find a way to climb the wall. They're going to find a way to get across it. And so the question is, like, what is, like, the humane thing to do? What is our responsibility as people who are born up and into this level of privilege? Well, one other thing I wanted to just like share, and I'll pass it around. It's this is the one last myth that I wanted to pass it around. The difficulty once they even get in here to get citizenship. It's takes about somewhere between 7 and 15 years once they are here and they start into that process to get into citizenship. And the only way, like the fastest way to do that is if you're like wealthy or if you have a very, very unique skill. Like the challenges these individuals face, like there's so many ways that they can still get kicked out once they are in that process. So you'll see that in the page that's coming. And so like I'll just talk a little bit about like what is our role in this issue, in this whole issue. I talked a little bit about our just being aware, like when you're buying something at a grocery store, to note that there's a way that produce or that food or that whatever it is that's made in the USA got to us so cheaply. And so to be thankful, it's not to stop shopping. Obviously, like this is paying people's wages. This is good for them. They're making the choice to do this. But to be thankful, to know that even if in Morgantown, West Virginia, that there's not this enormous immigrant population, that we are still connected to our brothers and sisters, that they are making our lives possible. Then to also note that whether we're silent or speaking out, the decisions that our country makes directly affect their lives. So obviously there is the likelihood of being able to allow more people into our country. And right now that is getting increasingly difficult, not only because of what we're doing at the border, but also what we're doing with social services. So the Trump administration has created a number of policies, including taking countries off lists that were previously on there in terms of asylum cases. So like if you are from Haiti or other places that have faced natural disasters, you could have previously declared asylum or stayed in the country, taking those countries out so that those people who were there under that status could more easily be deported. Taking services away from individuals, like documenting them for a way to get the services. So like it is one, to cut down the level of immigration that's taking place of people able to cross the border, but also to make the lives, just like in little mean ways, make the lives of those who are already here a lot more challenging. So to know that policy exists, but to also know that our actions in the past are directly related to this. And it's not distant past. We're not talking about trying to depose Fidel Castro decades ago. Like in 2009, we contributed, the U.S. policy contributed to deposing a democratically elected leader in Honduras. This was in 2009. And now a lot of the people that are fleeing Honduras are doing so because that there's not a stable government or stable systems. If you have those kinds of supportive coups, that's going to breed into that level of instability. So the decisions that our government makes have, in a lot of ways, and we're not completely responsible for what's happening there, but we do have some responsibility for the instability in these countries, the instability that is the direct cause for people wanting to migrate, to make these incredible sacrifices, these perilous journeys where it's not only a physical task to be able to do this, but also just like the safety issues that they face on the way up here. So to know that to recognize that even when we're not watching, our country still makes decisions that precipitate these crises that people are escaping. That people that are crossing the border are making really, really incredible sacrifices, and thinking about like how we can support them on that journey. So there is a suggestion that I'm going to make for our consideration as a church. What we heard is that one of the things that people really need at these resettlement centers or once they cross is they need clean underwear. I mean, if you can imagine like making that long of a journey, often like when they get to the border patrol actually takes their backpacks or anything that they're separated from them. So like literally they've been walking this whole way. And you can think about like wearing the same pair of underwear for how many weeks or across that journey. They need like clean pairs of underwear. That is like one of their needs. So one thing that I wanted to suggest is that we do like an underwear drive, and we send that underwear to Annunciation House where we volunteer, so that they can give them out to kids and to parents, to give them that sense of feeling of dignity. So that's, I think, one thing that we can do over the course of the next few weeks. Our Kaleidoscope of Blessings in August is going to go to Annunciation House, and this is an incredible, just an incredible operation, a feat of Christian love at its very best. This is a place that was not set up for the work that they're doing right now. But each day they're taking hundreds of individuals fleeing violence and refugees. Job that our country should be doing, but doing it so poorly and not doing it so that often Border Patrol are dropping these people off right at their doors. And so over the course of the last just few years, this organization, rather than saying no, has said yes. Like, okay, like there's nobody else here to do it. We will do it. We will house these people. We will feed them. And we will help coordinate their journey across the way. And this is, one of the biggest organizations doing it. And they have basically no staff. Like their executive director, I don't know if he takes a salary. He might do this all, just volunteer it. And they're just kids that are running this. So there's basically in this refugee resettlement center that takes hundreds of individuals a day. I think from what we gathered, there's literally 3 or 4 youth in their 20s that are running this whole thing every day without a break. And so to the extent that we can provide services, they are I've been to community service organizations where I'm oh, you guys there's so much going on in terms of your outward appearance that you're not, the work isn't authentic. This is the pure stuff, what this organization is doing. So we're gonna give an offering in a few weeks, in August, right? In August to Annunciation House for our Kaleidoscope of Blessings. I suggest that we raise some money for just the organization, but also give donations of underwear and other things that they might really need. And then I just challenge us over the course of this next week. I don't have a great idea of how we can be involved in this, but to let it bother you a little bit. When we go to the grocery stores and we get really cheap produce, to let it bother you a little bit to know that there's something that contributed to that. It's not to say that don't buy, obviously, again, to buy produce, but let that be a reminder that just because the problem's not directly in front of our face doesn't mean that these people, that there's not something that's contributing to the life that we have. I've been noticing it. It's just been so much more aware of it recently. I went to a conference just 2 weeks ago, and I was at the restaurant where we were having dinner, and I noticed all the people behind us that were serving food, the person that was coming in downstairs that was mopping the floor. We have an invisible economy in a lot of ways. It's in the food that we buy, It's in where if we go to a hotel in some cities, these people are made to be invisible. And how can we, through our daily actions, practice Christ's love to make them visible, to make them give them the inherent human worth that they are endowed. And so there's two ways that I feel like our country can move forward. We can move forward with the Donald Trump quote, or we can move forward with the scriptural quote that we heard right before the service. And each of us has that option in our own power to see how we can move more towards Christ's image in how we interact with these individuals. Again, I don't have really great answers on how to do that. I don't have the capacity in my life anymore to be that 20-some-year-old that runs a refugee resettlement. But to note that there are little things, that we can get them underwear, we can get them little services, and we can be the voices for them when there's a broader discussion of what type of people these people are and how we are to define them in our society. That we can define them not as criminals, but as heroes. Thank you.